Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum, and I'm so delighted to see so many of you here in the audience this evening. Before I go any further, I'm going to ask my friend Jacques in the audience, is my audio okay? I don't see people complaining about it, but every so often Crowdcast doesn't do right by me in my audio. So I just want to make sure I don't subject you all to any static or anything. So we are super duper happy to be hosting this as our second of a new series of author conversations with our new good friends at Harper's Magazine. Newish to us, but of course Mark Twain was published in Harper's. There's a long historic relationship. And if you go back into their archives, you can see some of the stories that Harper's did publish when he was alive. Speaking of the archives, Harper's Magazine has offered a beautiful subscription offer. If you scroll up in the chat, you can see it, and we'll place it again so it's easier to find. But for people who are registered for this program and the rest of the Harper's series, a special deal of subscription to Harper's, which the New York Times just called America's most interesting magazine. Now just think about that for a moment, all the magazines you read, and this is the most interesting one. And I can attest to that. I'm a subscriber myself. So you can get that subscription now for $16.97, and that includes the magazine's 170-year archive. So please follow that link and take advantage of that wonderful offer. I'm not going to talk for too long before I introduce our guests. I just want to familiarize some of you who may be new to Crowdcast with some of the features of Crowdcast, which are some of you already are participating in the chat, which is a lot of fun, and I encourage you to keep chatting among yourselves as the program continues. We know that people make friends there and make connections, and we love to see those connections occurring. But at the end of our program, we are going to do a Q&A session with Christine Smallwood and Beha, and we encourage you to put your questions for that part of the program in the Ask a Question area that you see at the bottom of your screen. There's already one question posted, I see. So that makes it a lot easier for us to manage the Q&A, and also you can take a look at the questions that your fellow audience members have posed and see if you have the same question and simply upvote it. Another opportunity I'd like to recommend to you this evening is you can purchase a signed copy of The Life of the Mind, Christine Smallwood's book that we're talking about here tonight. I hope you've been paying attention. This book is getting awesome reviews. And Christine, who I've only just met a couple times now on screen, is delightful. So if you do purchase this, we understand you could get this from other sources for sure, but if you do purchase through our Mark Twain store, number one, you'll get a signed copy, which is awesome. And number two, you'll know that you are supporting the Mark Twain House and Museum, which is really crucial to us. You know, we're a private nonprofit organization. This past year, though we've done all these virtual programs throughout the year, has been a real challenge for us financially because we've been mostly without our major source of revenue, which is our guided house tour. I'm delighted to say that we were able to reopen in a very limited fashion this past weekend to a sold-out set of house tours. We're grateful, as I can't tell you how grateful we are for that support, but it has not been an easy run for us. So I would just encourage you, if you're able and willing, anything that you'd be able to share with us in the way of a donation, we will greatly appreciate and put to very good use. And now's a very good time to donate to the Mark Twain House because the Travelers Golf Championship, through its Birdies for Charity program, adds 15% to your donation during this period. So your money goes a little bit, kind of a lot farther if you're able to do that now. So again, if you can click on that green button that's right below my face, the board and staff of the Mark Twain House and Museum will be very grateful for your help. So I'm going to introduce our guests and stop talking because I know you're interested in hearing them talk. So Chris Beha is the editor of Harper's Magazine, and his most recent novel, The Index of Self-Destructive Acts, was nominated for the 2020 National Book Award. And please join us again on May 4th when Chris will be here again with our dear friend, Rand Cooper, to talk about that book. And our new friend, Christine Smallwood, is a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine and a contributing editor at Harper's Magazine. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review, the New Yorker, Book Forum, T, and many other magazines. She has a PhD in English from Columbia University, and I can tell you she's delightful. So I'm really looking forward to spending an evening listening to these two people talk, and I'm going to reappear toward the end when we do the question and answer session. But for now, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Chris Beha and Christine Smallwood to the screen and to this conversation. Chris and Christine, welcome. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
Hi.
Hi. And Chris, you'll yell for me when it's time for me to hop back on?
Yes, I will.
All right, then I'm going to sit back and enjoy.
Okay. And I don't see Christine. I don't know if that's just me. So I will just, until Christine gets reconnected, just briefly introduce myself. I am Christopher Beha. I am the editor of Harper's Magazine, and I'm delighted to be here talking with Christine, who will be with us shortly, we hope. Christine's book is The Life of the Mind. Christine is a contributing editor, and here she is.
Hi.
Hi. So I was just saying, Christine is a contributing editor of Harper's Magazine and was formerly our new books columnist. And now she has published this really amazing novel that is getting a lot of wonderful praise, which she hasn't read, which we'll discuss later. But to start with, Christine's just going to read a little bit from the book.
Hi, everyone. I want to say thank you so much to Jennifer and the Twain House for hosting this event, and to Chris for doing this event with me. Harper's has been my magazine home for such a long time, and it is just such like a pleasure to do this with you, Chris. Okay, so I'm going to read a little excerpt from the novel just to give you a little bit of background. The novel is called The Life of the Mind, and the protagonist of the novel, can you hear me, Chris? You can hear me, right? Okay. Is an adjunct professor of English named Dorothy. And 6 days before the book begins, she has had a miscarriage. And throughout the book, she is continuing to bleed and expel her, quote, blighted ovum, and kind of dealing with some of the feelings of failure and feelings like that around her career and her life. And the scene I'm going to read from is in the second to last chapter, where Dorothy is at a party. It's a Saturday night, and her best friend Gabby, is taking out a karaoke machine. And there's a character named Raj, and that is Dorothy's boyfriend. Okay, so around midnight, Raj nudged Dorothy and cocked his head. Gabby was hauling out a karaoke machine. The sight of the machine filled Dorothy with dread. Shit, she said. For a long time, she had loved karaoke. Honestly, she had loved it too much. The love was frantic, but also complex, a complexity born of her desire to expose herself and be known, and her concomitant dread of exposing herself and being known. Of all the forms this conflict had ever taken in her life, karaoke was the purest. Do you want to leave while we still can? Raj asked. Yes, Dorothy said, but I think it's too late. Gabby was plugging wires into the TV with calm efficiency, a modern-day Hans Castorp running the gramophone in the sanitarium salon. They used to do it in private rooms. At first, it had all been so new and enchanting, the sticky darkness, the bizarre accompanying videos about which someone always had something to say, the caterwauling audible from inside the bathroom, when the nights other people were passing and other private rooms leaked into your own. And all this inside the dark and deep alcohol cocoon. Inside this cocoon, her voice was so good, so strong. It was amplified and loud enough to fill her head. Her friends and their friends were so beautiful. She could see their souls shining. It was an unbearable burden to love them so much. The problem with karaoke in those years was that it was so hard for it to end. And sometimes, depending on what kind of liquor she was drinking, in the later/earlier hours of the morning, Dorothy became morose, or fell into a funk as dark and soft as dirt. She might rouse herself out of it if someone encouraged her to sing again, or she might keep falling if someone started to sing a melancholy song. There was a variety of funk that Dorothy liked settling into, aided by nostalgic songs, when she felt the fragility of her ebbing youth and the sweet ache of pleasures she had known or missed. There was another funk that was loneliness and grief, and sometimes these two funks blended together into an overpowering pang of life and death, in which Dorothy experienced the smallness of her being knit into the large, incomprehensible whole of everything else. Great passions were expressed and mourned. She would come home wound up like a clock, pulsing with all the songs sung and unsung, running on anxiety and regret, amped up and disappointed, wanting more, and also wanting to have had much less. That too was part of the love, the bitterness that it did not last. Some time ago, karaoke had stopped being fun, and then it had become a chore, and then a kind of poison that caused Dorothy's internal organs to shut down one by one, but still she did it. Sometimes it was even her idea. It was hard to stop doing something you had once liked doing. There always seemed to be the possibility you could like it again, could be the person you had been, who was now a stranger. Gabby handed Dorothy the second microphone and put on an emotive ballad from their parents' youth. It was way too early to go full throttle on this kind of thing, but it was part of Gabby's charm that she never took the temperature of the room. Everyone else was engaged in crosstalk or looking at their phones, or worse, a few people were staring at them, their heads idly nodding, offering half smiles of polite encouragement. Dorothy felt that they were all prisoners together, but of what she couldn't say. The dictate to enjoy? Nostalgia for a time they had never known? The obligation to please the hostess? Their own mortality? Their parents' mortality? Gabby told Dorothy to stay up for the second number. It started loud and fast and high, and from the excitement in the room, Dorothy gathered that this was a new song from a teen star that everyone except her had heard dozens of times and liked for reasons whose irony and sincerity could not be teased apart. Dorothy quickly passed the microphone to someone else. "I've never heard this song before," she shouted to Gabby, who was already belting the chorus. Listening to Gabby, Dorothy felt herself expanding and also felt the reflected glow of nobility that always attended the admiration of a friend. Love for someone else's karaoke performance was greater and more intense than love for a great song because it was love for the person singing. Karaoke involved destroying something significant and putting oneself into the place of the thing you had killed. Beautiful singing took you somewhere. It transported you in a reverie, but it took you back to yourself. That was why people cried when they listened to beautiful music. Amateurism kept the focus on the amateur. It was about appreciating the artist, not the art. Karaoke doubled the song. Even when you didn't know the original song, you never heard just the version that was present. You were always aware of another version, a real version, a ghost version, to which the current version existed in relation. That was the pathos of karaoke. It was a way of striving, an imitation not in the cheap sense, but in the sense of the meaning that attends an imitation of God. There were, of course, people who put on joke songs and tried to distance themselves from the power, and Dorothy always felt sorry for them. We are all in the gutter, she always wanted to tell them, but some of us are looking at the stars. I'm going to stop there.
Okay. That's great. I had a different question I was going to start with, but I wanted to get to this eventually. And since you were talking about this idea in karaoke of performing when you've got this original behind you, I feel like I should get right into this, which is so you have a PhD in literature, in which your focus was the novel, and you have been a longtime critic, writing most often about novels.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that, what do you do with that history, with knowing the tradition of the form and the sort of high points of this form and having all of that history behind you? What do you do with that when you sit down and start writing a novel?
What do you do with it, Chris?
I try to forget it.
What's that? Try to forget
it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's, I will say that I do think when I'm stuck writing, and this is true of anything, if it's like any kind of magazine piece or a work of fiction or whatever, reading always helps, right? It's like you read and you read and you read and you read, and then eventually you just get so full of reading that you're ready to start writing. Do you think there is something kind of imitative about all writing, or you kind of start there and then you get kind of lost in your own thing and then everything else falls away? So I actually think knowing the history of the novel is really like enabling. It can be, stressful to contemplate the greatness that has been, but, I'm only me. So I can only, be me. And I can only be me in our time. So I don't, I'm not like comparing myself to the past.
Right.
Is that like what you do?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that, I think when you start out trying to write and maybe you haven't read a ton or you're still working through, you have, younger writers, I'd say this, or writers who have read less, they actually tend to prize originality more, while also having no sense that what they're doing is completely derivative.
Right.
Whereas I would say that you and I probably are actually aware of like the ways in which what we're doing is derivative, because it can't help but be when you're working with this in this form, and are sort of okay with that, because maybe you get to a certain point where you realize that originality is not the like grand criterion for a work.
Right. Well, it's new to you, right? Like you've never written like that before. So it's kind of like any idea, like you meet a young person and they're really fired up about maybe it's a political idea or a social idea, and it's new to them, right? And like those ideas were new to you once too when you were in college. And I think writing is kind of the same way.
Yeah. And no one has ever used this form to work through the particular experiences that you're working through.
Yeah. And no one has ever, reached the particular people that you're reaching. Like your readers are a unique combination of people that have never existed before.
How much do you think about your readers?
Really never. And actually it's been, so I don't know why I said that, but it's been actually kind of shocking that people have read the book. Like this is my first book that I've published. And so maybe every writer goes through this, but it was kind of sort of overwhelming to me to realize that actually people had read the book. They were emailing me. They had ideas about it. It was kind of a lot to take in, because while I was writing, I literally never got farther than just finishing the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the question I was going to start with, starting at the very beginning. So you dedicated this book to your friends. I will take that as a compliment as a friend of yours. But I imagined when I read that you were thinking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of the people who went through this experience of academia with you, of those friends, but maybe not. But I wondered about that.
Oh, it's interesting. So there's actually a particular story behind that, which is that I was having a hard time finishing the book, and a friend of mine was trying to kind of like reassure me. And she said this thing that was like, like she had published a book at some point, not a novel, but she had published a book. And she was like, I mean, it's not a big deal, Christine. Like you'll just like have a reading and like, your friends will come, and then like, that's it. Cause she has a kind of job that reaches more people than the world of books. And on the one hand, I was like a little bit offended, by this remark. On the other hand, it was so helpful to me, because I was like, oh my God, she's right. Really, this is just for me and my friends. Like this isn't for like the public or posterity or whatever. This is just for like the few people who I know who care about me and who I care about. And that actually like totally, I immediately put the dedication on like the front of the Word document, and then was able to finish the book. So I was thinking of you, in a way. It wasn't like for my academic friends.
It wasn't for like the people who had been through this. It's like you're writing your war memoir, and it's for like the people who are in your platoon.
No, but this isn't to say I'm not thrilled that I hope strangers, I hope you read my book, and like you are welcome here too. But imagining strangers was not helpful. Yeah.
Well, no, the thing too, I mean, my last book I spent a very long time working on, and the thing I kept telling myself was, no matter what happens, no matter, what kind of advance you get or who published it or what your reviews are or whatever, you're going to have this like this book party, and all your friends are going to be there, and you're going to have that moment where all the people who love you are in one room to celebrate this book. And then of course that didn't happen. So you didn't get that. So like the thing that you were using as to get through it is like, you're going to have a reading and your friends will show up.
Right.
That did not happen.
No, I didn't know.
So there's like a lesson about proleptic imagination though for that, because the book happened and that was the point.
Yeah. And, I think that actually a book party would make me so stressed. I'm the person who has a really bad time at her own birthday party. I just find it so anxiety provoking. So in a certain way, this is better for me.
Yeah. Um, so to the substance of the book itself, as you say, the main character Dorothy is an adjunct professor who is going through this miscarriage, and while also kind of going through a somewhat miscarried academic career, and we're obviously like we're in her head a lot, um, and that's the kind of double meaning of the life of the mind. And I had not noticed when I read it the first time in the karaoke line that thing about the thing that she had liked about karaoke. Well, she liked it was the voice in the head, and I don't know if you can sort of talk about that sense of a narrator it's this voice you're with the whole time, but it seems like sometimes she is herself someone who like doesn't like the voice that's narrating her own life, doesn't want to listen to that narrator.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I definitely think, well, I guess there's two things to say. One is that, I mean, there's one interest in karaoke, which is just about this desire to be known and then this desire to hide. And that kind of characterizes Dorothy throughout. Like she has these therapists, so she like goes to them to seek care, but then she doesn't tell them what's happening about her miscarriage. And she like has this friend, Gabby, who she also, so she's kind of always withholding the thing that could help people reach her. But by doing that, she's like kind of creating a privacy around herself that is sustaining for her in some way, even if it's also kind of harming her. And then there's just this idea of like the voice in her head. Yeah, I mean, I think that she's kind of looking for ways maybe to like blot that out or to get away from it. Yeah, but isn't kind of always able to. I mean, I don't think we really ever can get away from the voices in our heads.
So did you feel there's things, the a lot of physical descriptions of the process, the physical process of having this miscarriage,
Yeah.
And other things where you're I don't know if like challenging the reader is the right word, but you're putting stuff on the page that often doesn't get put on the page.
Yeah.
That's incidentally like obviously been one element of the evolution of the tradition of the novel, is more and more stuff that earlier novels thought was not appropriate to be on the page gets put on the page, sort of starting with sex, but then going out to, all sorts of stuff beyond that.
Yeah.
And I wonder like how much of that was like a conscious choice and how much of it was just like, I'm writing about this experience that happens to women and I'm going to actually like describe what the experience is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little of both. Like, I definitely at some point made a kind of, this novel started as a short story. And at the time, the short story, I just wrote without like really thinking about what I was doing or what it meant or anything like that. And then when I decided to try to extend the short story basically and turn it into a novel or make a novel out of the short story, one thing that did keep me going, and the short story had begun in this kind of graphic way. So there was already like built in this kind of like hyper attention to the body, is that I would literally say to myself, like, my job is to bring this like private female experience into public. And that like motivated me. I was like, I believe this is important. And I also, like honestly, as a critic, I also like, I do very much identify as like a woman critic or a female critic. And I do kind of think of part of what I want to do with my criticism is to bring a kind of like female point of view into public. And so that just kind of like kept me going with the novel. And I would be like, is this too much? But at a certain point, I was so in it that it didn't really feel like too much anymore. I think I really lost perspective on it. And then so when other people read it and they were like, whoa, I was like, what? Like I kind of just been so immersed in that world. And, and I think in the same way that the kind of miscarriage that Dorothy has is an incredibly common, but very rarely discussed experience. I think the bleeding in the book is also like incredibly, like women,
Right.
people who have vaginas and those body parts like experience that. It's just that, as you say, it doesn't often like make it into literature.
So you spoke about your criticism, and I've already sort of asked some part of the question of like how your criticism influenced your writing as a novelist. I'm curious about the reverse, whether you approach criticism differently now that you have.
I haven't gotten a chance to write very much criticism since finishing this book. But no, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see. I have not reviewed a novel since my own novel was published. And I think it will be really interesting to see like what that feels like moving forward. Have you found that it changes how you write about literature?
I don't know if the fiction writing does. I think certainly I do think getting like older does.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I don't. Um, I have very little interest in like taking people down. It was never like a huge part of what I did, but like pretty early in my career as a nonfiction writer, I wrote a pretty nasty review of Jeffrey Kennedy's novel for the LRB, and it got a lot of attention,
Mm-hmm.
because it was, a big writer who, and it was, and I think it was The Marriage Plot. It was a bad book. It's like, I don't think I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden I found like at the kind of parties that you and I used to go to,
Mm-hmm.
like different people were not coming over to talk to me. Like there's this
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, yeah, I get how you turn into like Dale Peck. I get
Mm-hmm.
how you decide like, if I'm really nasty about people and I take down the like big game and I
Mm-hmm.
do it sharply, there's like people will read that, people will pay attention to that, people will
Mm-hmm.
um and uh like I just lost the taste for that. But not
Yeah.
necessarily, I don't know if that's because I like got put through the ringer myself or something, or if that's just, but that
Yeah.
definitely happened to me.
I think I share that with you. When I was at The Nation, I think the first book review I wrote was a vicious takedown of Rick Moody, which now seems like a ridiculous thing to do with
Right.
your time. Um,
Which was, of
and
course, Dale Peck's signature.
right,
It was precisely the
that
same.
was his
Yeah.
move. Yeah, and yeah, I think for me, it's just about like how you want to spend your time. Like if there is like a writer that has like been really overpraised in some way, like I do think it can be worthwhile to go in and take that apart. But if you really hate, I mean, like the kind of reviews that I think both of us like to write is where you spend a long time reading the whole person's body of work. And if you really don't like the work, that's just such an unpleasant way to spend your time.
Right. And it's less and less common for a writer to have the kind of outsized cultural influence, or even influence a single writer like within the literary sphere, that you'd want to kind of correct that,
Right.
In the way that you could imagine in an earlier generation, a takedown of like, Updike or something
Right. Right.
so large. And
right. Which isn't to say that books aren't overpraised, because they certainly are.
yes,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, the vast majority of books are fine, but not
They're
terrible.
fine. Yeah.
And that's the least interesting review. It's like,
right.
This was fine.
That's okay. Yeah.
So to get back to the thing that I briefly referred to, when we were chatting when we first got on this, before we went live, I congratulated you on this great review you got in the Times, where John Williams wrote a very, very positive review, and a very smart one, but that was also just very praising of like not just this book, but of like the career you have ahead of you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't know this because you haven't read it, and that's the point. So I asked you about it, and you were like, I haven't read any of the reviews. And so tell me about that.
Well, so and this might shock people who follow my Twitter, because I have tweeted a few times in such a way that probably suggests that I have myself read the reviews, but I have not. My husband has read them and has in some cases summarized them, and in other cases just been like, it's good, or oh, this one isn't so good, or whatever, or here's the one sentence that isn't so good. Like I'm aware of them and their general arguments. I think that I don't exactly know how to explain it, because I think that, from one point of view, it's like you're a critic, so you should read the reviews, but they just don't seem to have anything to do with me. And they don't seem like they would help me in any way. And I think at some point, like 6 months from now, it might be interesting to sit down and read all of them together, like as a kind of portfolio of conversation around that happened around the book. Because I do feel very fortunate to have gotten, the book has gotten good attention, and that's really great. But to read them as they come out feels like very reactive. And it's more than that. Like I've actually had the feeling like kind of like a physical avoidance. Like I'm avoiding the reviews the way you like avoid someone in the college cafeteria. Right. Like you feel like that encounter could somehow harm you. Because, even praise can be harmful. Like being praised for the wrong, like, you're never like praised the way you want to be praised. It's like a relationship. Like no one ever loves you for like the thing you want to be loved for. And then you're in this position where you're sort of like churlish, you've gotten this good review, but it said this thing that isn't the thing you would say, so I'm all like psychologically twisted up about it, but yeah. I hope to one day we have some distance.
But also, when you're a critic, you also recognize that you don't write for the author either. No, that's like it's like
it's not about that.
I would never like even. I think, some people who do the takedowns are trying to actually like get a glove on somebody. But even when I'm doing the negative thing, it's not, the idea is not like either this person's going to read it and they're going to have their feelings hurt and I'm going to like that, or this person's going to read it and they're going to realize what they're doing wrong and next time they're going to do better, or it's just... Yeah,
it doesn't feel helpful to have all those voices in your head. And it's like criticism is its own kind of story. It's just like you're telling a story about a text or an object, right? And I definitely feel in some ways that like what I think the book is about is kind of the least relevant thing at this point. It's like the least interesting to hear me say what I think the book is. It's like the book is out there and now it's an object in the world and people can hopefully read it and like even better want to talk about it. Like that's amazing. But I don't need to like get into like a fight in my head where then I'm like feeling injured or misunderstood or whatever.
I want to get back a little bit to academia because obviously it's where this is set, and you are not really there anymore. But when I was making this apparently incorrect supposition about this dedication to your friends, you and were involved with a group of your PhD cohorts in founding the Brooklyn Institute. You seem to have like a decent number of academic friends who wound up in like adjacent, not quite traditional, some people who are in jobs and some, I don't know what your kind of like, obviously if this isn't an issues novel, this is not in that sense, but like if there is like a kind of like a social problem being illuminated here, it is about the precarity of people who are attempting to live the life of the mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the affective state around that precarity, right? I mean, because Dorothy is not the most precarious of the precarious, like we've all heard adjunct stories about like, oh, this adjunct was like donating their blood, or this person was like on food stamps, or, like there's some real like legitimate horror stories out there, and Dorothy's not quite at that place yet. And I don't think that we're meant to think that she's going to actually get to a place where she's, destitute. She's dealing with more of the sort of like affect of like stuckness, of disappointment, of not knowing how or when to cut her losses. That kind of more like run-of-the-mill precarity that also I think characterizes the world of freelance magazine writing. I mean, I think one reason that I was able to write the book is because I was in a similarly precarious state as a freelancer. So I'd gone from one kind of dead end to another dead end. And now I'm in a third dead end, published fiction writer.
Right.
You know?
And then you have things like, you know, a lot of just like the nitty gritty of the experience of that, of going to the conference and, you know, of having the star older professor, the relationship there, which was, you know, one of the more interesting parts of the book, that relationship. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so Dorothy has this mentor, her former advisor from graduate school is a woman named Judith. And Judith is supposed to be a kind of, you know, representative of the old guard, you know, like one of these professors who have a sort of Avital Ronell type figure, right? Who has like acquired so much status and prestige and, you know, did really groundbreaking work. At one point, we're told that the whole reason Dorothy wanted to become an academic and go to grad school was to work with Judith. But of course, you know, Judith has, and this is all kind of in flashback because they actually meet in the current day when Dorothy is has finished her PhD. But, you know, Judith sort of like terrorized her in various ways, you know, stole her work, but in like a kind of minor way that kind of like, you know, leaves no visible marks, that kind of way. And, you know, just kind of abused her power. And Dorothy is kind of trying to process like what it means that in the future there won't be people like Judith anymore, and how that's both a good thing because there'll be, you know, you won't be able to abuse power if you don't have it, but it's also this kind of tragedy because this historical moment of the academy is what's passing. And I think, I mean, I'm not in the academy right now, but that's clearly what's happening, right? I mean, like there's a major transformation undergoing, and in 20 years, we don't really know what it's going to look like.
There's another element which, you know, presumably people who are in academia have been experiencing for a long time that isn't specific to this moment, but certainly it's added on to, and that you again touched on in the part you read. There's this thing about her changing feelings towards karaoke, and there's this sense of like what it means to not love anymore this thing that you loved. And this is sort of like a famous element of academia, of people who have a real passion for the underlying subject is what makes you decide to dedicate yourself to it. And then you get into this world.
Yeah, because the world isn't actually about literature, right? It's about the production of paradigms, right? It's about like how you can create a method or a mode of reading or whatever, and then use it to like whack-a-mole every text you encounter, to be very reductive. I mean, that's what I thought I was being asked to do. Yeah, and I think like in the terms of the novel, like Dorothy is kind of in a situation where she's lost a lot of things, right? So she's like lost her faith, you know, we're kind of led to understand that she grew up in a religious home, and then she's like lost her love of literature. She's lost this pregnancy that she doesn't quite know how to feel about. She's, I guess I shouldn't say she's lost her love of literature. She's lost her faith in the university, is what I should say.
And in her sort of faith more generally, I'm interested in how you, I mean, as you know, that's a topic of great interest to me, and that the way that novels work through that topic is of great interest to me. And there's probably readers who do not have that particular interest that I have, that almost wouldn't even pick up on that in this novel.
In this novel, yeah.
It's not like you're doing anything heavy-handed about it, or it's meant to jump out at you but it's consistent throughout as one of the features of this character.
Yeah, I think it's there if you know what to look for. Like in the beginning, you know, she's teaching a few classes. One of them is on the apocalypse, and her relationship to Jonathan Edwards seems like a little bit extra charged, right? And like she talks about no longer feeling held up, right? And then you kind of learn that there was this kind of pro-life background, that she had gone to some marches, and her ambivalence around early pregnancy and kind of how to conceptualize it is very much rooted in that experience. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm very interested in formal questions, again, for someone who's spent so much time thinking about the form of the novel. Yeah. And what's interesting about this, the this novel, I mean, among other things, is there is a way in which it's incredibly sort of like self-conscious, in the sense that you're in the head of a very self-conscious person who, among other things, is very conscious herself of like the history of the novel, and stuff like that. But it is not. There are also ways in which it's just sort of like committed to what you might call like the grammar of realism or something like that. You know, it is at the same time in like a fairly straightforward way, like telling the story of this character over this period of time.
Yes. It's not that experimental. I mean, I think that like it has a structure. I mean, like Dorothy, you know, talks a little bit about plot and plotting and feeling that she's kind of lost the plot of her life. And there isn't like a big, it's not a novel like your book where there's like a bunch of different strands that are kind of woven together in a kind of like beautiful and kind of coherent way. But you know, this is true of your book too. It hangs together on a bunch of ideas, right? And a bunch of kind of like thematic things that kind of reoccur, like motifs or whatever. But it also, the book is like structured all around, you know, the time of the bleeding. And so like for me, that is what kind of like stood in for plot, right? Instead of working towards a reveal of some kind, the book is just kind of structured in a very intentional way. And there's a doubling. So, you know, the book actually opens after the miscarriage, right? And so it's kind of like all aftermath. So in one way, the project was like, let's put the end before the beginning, right? You know, like and so the end has already happened. And so what happens after the end? And then there's like, I don't want to like give it away if people haven't read it, but there is like a thing that is sort of rhymes with the miscarriage. And that's supposed to offer some kind of satisfaction to the reader in lieu of, I don't know, a better plot. I mean, a friend told me that her mom started to read it and then was like, eventually I just realized that nothing was going to happen. And so I stopped reading it. And I thought that was a great reaction and totally fair, you know, because in a certain sense, like nothing does happen. In another sense, everything happens.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then, you know, another thing, just thinking formally about it, one of the things I like about the book is it is a novel in which the main character has a handful, at least, but a handful of knowable biographical similarities to the author.
Yeah.
But it is not what I would call a work of autofiction. And I think there's something refreshing about that. Like, just to be reminded that there is like such a thing as taking a few things from your own life and then fictionalizing them and like making up a character who goes through experiences, some of which you may have gone through in a different way, and some of which you didn't go through at all. And
when my agent sold it, I love my agent and he's wonderful. I think some of the language that he used was autofiction in the third person. And then when I talked to the woman, my editor, Alexis, on the phone the first time, she was like, oh yeah, he said it was like autofiction in the third person. And I was like, yeah, I mean, isn't that just a regular novel? You know? That's literally what you just said. It's like stuff happens to you and then you turn it into fiction. That's what novels are.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's like I like that about the book. And in a way, it like speaks to what we were talking about before, that like when you have a robust sense of the history of the novel, and obviously, so, you know, some of the autofiction writers, like, you know, Ben is extremely sophisticated but you just know that this isn't like this thing that started happening in the last 15 years that like people put themselves in their books. You just understand that this is the way that like literature has gotten made for maybe the last 150 years, not like forever, but like yeah.
And it's funny. I think that I would write about autofiction differently now after. I think that is like, I feel like I learned something writing this book. I would think I would write about it differently in the future than I have in the past.
What would you say about it now?
I think I would focus on it less as a category and more just on the particular texture of each of those books that gets put together in that category. Yeah.
One of my things about it is that it used to be that like first you had to get famous, and then you could make your famous self, like, and then you could know it. Like, obviously this is what Roth did, but like, if Roth doesn't write Portnoy's, which then there can't be Nathan Zucker.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think it's certainly, whatever autofiction is, I do think it's related to some kind of breakdown in authority, right? Where like we feel we can only speak for ourselves.
Right.
And I definitely, the parts of my life that I put into the book, or that I used to come up with what the book would be or whatever, did give me like confidence, that I was like, okay, this is a real thing that happened. So I can put it in the book and it won't feel fake because it's real.
And nobody who like had the experience herself could be like, she got that wrong and she did an injustice to my experience. Because
I mean, I've thought, so I know we both have children, and I've thought about this with being a parent. Like, I think if I didn't have my own children, I could never write a character who was a parent. And I'm sure there are amazingly gifted fiction writers who could do that, like who don't need to have experienced something to make it up. And that's a whole other debate that we could, like, it's kind of an interesting conversation to have. But I think sometimes what gets lost in this debate about like who has the right to represent what is just like, who is like compelled to represent what, or who feels that they can represent what. And I certainly found the use of my own life to be very like enabling, and then I could make up stuff growing out of that.
Yeah. I also think we're so trained within our particular culture to think in terms of rights. Like, that's the discourse, is what people do or do not have the right to. Yeah. And so when we have a conversation about like appropriation or the use of this or that material, that's the only way we know how to say like that was wrong. Like,
or that was bad.
Or that was bad. Yeah. You didn't have the right to do it.
Yeah.
But people have the right to do things, and then they can do them badly.
Right.
And
they can fail.
Like, they failed at doing that. And it's like, it's sort of like, it's odd that we don't know how to say that anymore.
Yeah. It does feel funny though. Like when I think about like, what do I call myself? Like, what kind of writer? I don't know if you have these thoughts, but I think calling myself a fiction writer feels kind of like a fraud, I think, for this reason, because I'm, not, I don't think I could just sit down and like spin an old yarn about somebody whose life is like really different. So I'm glad people can do that.
I feel like a fraud calling myself a writer. I just say I'm an editor because it's like the thing that like makes up the majority of my income. You know what I mean? It's like I couldn't eat on my writing, and therefore I'm an editor is what I actually am, who also writes things.
Right.
But
I wish I had that to hide behind.
We'll get you we'll get you business cards. Like, that much I can do.
Okay, good.
Should we hand it over to some questions? I think Jennifer is going to come back.
Here I am. Before I take the audience questions, I just wanted to say what a luxury and a delight to spend the evening hearing the two of you talk so frankly and almost humbly about writing. And it's something that so many people like myself want to be able to say we've done, but you really take a lot of the mystery out of it, and like I really appreciate it. And I can't think of an evening where I've experienced that with two writers like you. So thank you.
I tend to be very
right. Well, thank you. It's been very refreshing, and I've enjoyed every minute, and I know our audience has too. So we've got 5 questions, and they're all over the place. I'm going to start with the second one from Pamela, who asks, the wonderful humor in the life of the mind sometimes reminded me of Kingsley Amos's in Lucky Jim. I know, a very different book in so many ways. Was that novel in any way an influence or anti-influence for you?
I have read that book, but I read it so long ago that I don't remember anything about it. So maybe it's deep in my unconscious, but it's not in my conscious mind.
The thing I remember very distinctly about the book is there is a chapter that begins with the description of Jim's hangover.
Oh.
And it has to do with like he felt like a small woodland creature had first taken up residence and then met his demise in his lungs, or so. I don't know.
A small wood creature?
A small woodland creature. It's like a small wood. No.
I'm making a joke about my name.
I'm not getting that right, but that's one of the, it's probably the greatest description of a hangover.
That's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. If I can just jump on that question, one thing I had sort of meant to ask before is, there is this genre of the campus novel, and this is obviously participating in the academic novel, but also in the campus novel. But like, one of the things about being in this adjunct land is she does spend time on campus. She spends time in the library. She teaches her classes, but she doesn't, like, the campus is not like her community in the same way that the campus used to be in the campus novel.
Right. Well, I mean, she's literally dislocated from the camp. I mean, it's like, as an adjunct, she doesn't have an office. She doesn't want to go into the department where she's going to run into people who are not her colleagues, right? Who like don't recognize her or know who she is in the same way. And so it's like a campus novel, but you have to take away all of the physical places where people come together. She doesn't want to use the copier
because she doesn't want to get told she has no business.
Yeah, I mean, she's in the library like an undergrad. It's like a sort of humiliating. It's a humiliating place for her, as well as like the place where she does her work.
Oh, that was a good follow-up question, Chris. Thank you. Naoko Sato, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, but you had a very good question. While there is little scientific explanation for Dorothy's miscarriage, the theme of contingency recurs in the novel. Do you think the novel renders her miscarriage as a chance event?
Oh, what a good question. Contingency is like one of the sort of key words of the book. It is. I do think it's a chance event. So we're told that it's a blighted ovum, right? And that is like a kind of miscarriage. That's the kind of miscarriage I had. It's like nobody knows why, but the embryo just stops developing, right? And so there is one line of thinking that probably happens more in cases where there's a genetic abnormality and the body kind of like rejects the pregnancy, but it could happen for any reason. And so I do think the blighted ovum is both like contingency and fate, right? Because Dorothy definitely experiences it as a kind of like fated event that has befallen her in the same way that her ruined career is like a fated event. But on the other hand, it could easily have gone the other way, right? And it could have easily continued on. And I think one of the reasons that she feels so stuck is, we're told early on that she hasn't really decided if she wants to keep the pregnancy or not. And so to kind of be denied the opportunity to even know if you desire something or not, and to have it kind of taken away, I think accounts for a lot of her mental anguish. I hope I answered that question.
To my satisfaction.
Okay, great.
I just want to jump in and say that Ann Dybel has provided the actual quote from Lucky Jim.
Hi, Ann.
Which is, his mouth had been used as a latrine by some small creature of the night, and then as its mausoleum.
Whoa. That's amazing. I'm going to read that book again.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Oh. On the topic of references, and this is a question coming from somebody who didn't provide their name, but did Christine make up the line about Frank O'Hara? Do those people exist?
Did I make up the line about Frank O'Hara? Oh, did you mean the thing about Frank O'Hara whispering poems? Is that a real event are you asking if that happened to me?
I guess that's a question.
That's an inappropriate question.
No, yeah, this is what we're talking about here.
So in the novel, Dorothy runs into an acquaintance from graduate school who she had a relationship with, and the relationship ended because they had this really unpleasant sexual encounter where this man, Keith, whispered poems by Frank O'Hara into her vagina while performing cunnilingus. And I think the questioner is asking if that happened.
You make that up.
Man, our desire to know like what
Right.
happened and what didn't is so deep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's where it turns into autofiction, is when you sort of like step out and say, this really happened to me.
You know what? This whole experience is just going to go in my next novel, and we'll just leave it like that.
We look forward to it. Please come back and talk for us when you publish. Oh my. Okay. Lauren wants to know, aside from the miscarriage, obviously, is Dorothy's character / position / mindset necessarily female? Christine, can you talk about writing fiction about the female experience and whether that was an important motivator in writing this book?
So I will say that, yes, for me, in my mind, I was like, this is about the experience of being female. That said, I have been really interested and encouraged by men who have read the book and who in some cases like identify with it or are moved by it in some way. And I think that it's that kind of thing where when you go very deeply into one particular, you actually wind up being a little bit universal. And kind of the only way to say something potentially true for others is to say it very, deeply true for one person. So yes, for me, I did feel that it was sort of uniquely female, but I am glad that I think I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
You, having said what you said before about like not feeling that you're the kind of fiction writer who tells yarns and makes the stuff up in that way, that it's all comes out of your experience some way. Yeah. Do you ever write from male characters' perspectives? Is that something that interests you?
I don't know if I have ever done that. I think I've written like one story that was in the third person that had like interiority for a man and a woman, but I've never written a story just from a man's point of view.
It's a really good segue into a question from Corinne, or Corinne. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name too. I wondered about Raj's character and was interested in how little mental real estate she gives him and their relationship, especially in light of the miscarriage. Was that a conscious or intentional move to show her silence around their relationship?
Yeah, it was. And I think there's like, when I think about it, I think there are two things that you could say about it. One is that it's part of her, depression or despair, that she kind of feels so isolated, right? That she's gone to a place that Raj is not very relevant to her, and certainly feels that whatever has befallen her regarding the miscarriage is her burden alone, right? There's like a real sense of isolation around her. And I think one way to read the silence around Raj is as kind of evidence of that depression or isolation. I think the other way to look at it is that we're told that what Dorothy likes about Raj is the sense that he protects her privacy, that he's tactful, that he doesn't like get too intimate with her. And so there's a kind of keeping him at a distance maybe all the time. And I think you could read the book either way, read that relationship either way.
Oh, thank you. And we have just one more question. And you had mentioned that you started this as a short story. Was that story published in any form, or and so where could we find it?
It's an N+1, and it's very similar to the first 10 pages of the book. So if you've read the book, you've basically read the story, but it was an N+1. Okay,
good. Good question. Thank you. Wow. That's the questions that our audience had. I think you guys covered so much ground during your talk itself that there weren't a whole lot of things left to be asked, but I thought the questions were amazingly astute. So thank you for your great questions, audience, and thank you for your great answers. What a wonderful evening, and I'm so grateful to be part of this series, and the Mark Twain House is so proud of this partnership with Harper's. I want to remind people, if you didn't want to buy this book before, I can't imagine that you don't want to buy it now. So please do follow the link and know that purchasing your signed copy through the Twain House does benefit us as well. And please do take advantage of Harper's generous offer for the subscription. That's an amazing price, $16.97 for a year subscription is fantastic. So, and I hope that you'll both come back to the Mark Twain House. We like to say that the Mark Twain House is a writer's home and a home for writers, and we're always excited to add new writers to our family. So I don't know, I know Christine, you told me that you had been here to the Mark Twain House some time ago, so I hope you'll come back and see our newly restored spaces and take a tour, and that'll be a sign that everything's coming back to normal too. So thank you both for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for your wonderful questions once again, and for your donations. We appreciate it. So we will see you on May 4th for Chris's talk with Rand Cooper about his book. So look forward to seeing many of you there. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.